Chapter 8 is called The Trunchbull. It's not Miss Trunchbull, it is The Trunchbull, as though she is an object. So we finally meet her after hearing about her terrific self. And we have an interaction in her office between Miss Honey and herself, Miss Trunchbull, about Matilda and Matilda's future. Now, there's also mention of Mr. Wormwood, and we'll see how he is influencing already Matilda's potential future at the school. The chapter opens with Miss Honey essentially being fully motivated to go and face Miss Trunchbull. As she puts it, it would be ridiculous to leave a child like that stuck in the bottom form, the form being the class, the lowest, the youngest class of the school. So normally Miss Honey is terrified of Miss Trunchbull, but with this in mind, she feels that she's able to confront her and for Matilda's sake, basically. There's also an indication that Mrs. Honey doesn't feel like Miss is frightened of her, also because of their opposing views towards education. The fact that Miss Trunchbull is not there for the betterment of the students, for the growth of the children, but has other aims in mind, which we are going to see. Let's go to this passage. Now, most head teachers are chosen because they possess a number of fine qualities. They understand children and they have the children's best interests at heart. They are sympathetic, they are fair, and they are deeply interested in education. Miss Trunchbull possessed none of these qualities, and how she ever got her present job was a mystery. She was, above all, a most formidable female. She had once been a famous athlete, and even now the muscles were still clearly in evidence. She could see them in the bull neck, in the big shoulders, in the thick arms, in the sinewy wrists, and in the powerful legs. Looking at her, you got the feeling that this was someone who could bend iron bars and tear telephone directories in half. Her face, I'm afraid, was neither a thing of beauty nor a joy forever. She had an obstinate chin, a cruel mouth, and small, arrogant eyes. And as for her clothes, they were, to say the least, extremely odd. Miss Trunchbull is introduced, much like the narrator initially introduces Matilda's parents. And then first, we hear all about what a headmistress should be like, all the qualities that she has, and then he kind of takes the rug from under our feet and tells us, well, she's none of those things, and describes her in a really terrifying manner, with qualities that are quite the opposite of what you would want a headmistress to have. And obviously her physique itself is very intimidating. If you think of young children, it's a primary school, so they would go up to the age of 9, 10, and that's very intimidating. Now, it also is apparent that her goal is seemingly to terrify, very purely to terrify people. And we come back to the themes again. This is how she wants to have power, and she will take advantage of young children in terms of them being small and her being in a senior position. She is in that position to be able to feel more powerful and to overpower them. Now, again, in terms of how did she get this job? How on earth did she get this job? the narrator doesn't say so, but there is a little bit indication of the mysterious circumstances, which is saying she might have gotten this by cheating and lying. And again, you're getting a parallel with Mr. Wormwood, that these are unethical people, that these are people who will do what they need to do to get what they need to get, whatever it is, and whoever might be in their way. And finally, this is interesting because we know, even in this respect, we're starting to get a feeling of, okay, this is another character who is cruel and unjust, and the thing that Matilda is probably most preoccupied with, most worried about, is fighting injustice. So Miss Trunchbull is now Matilda's potentially next target in terms of leveling of the playing field, or essentially paying her back for any injustices that she's going to cause. So once again, we have this theme of fighting injustice is played up around here. The conversation continues between Miss Honey and Miss Trunchbull, and Miss Trunchbull constantly being pictured as barking aggressively. Barking is what a dog does, but that is the level of aggression that she is described as having. And what Miss Honey wants from this conversation comes up, and she would like Matilda to be put up a grade, or put up to a higher class, because she's far more advanced than the rest of the class, and that is how she will get the most out of being at school. Where that just isn't going to play very well with Miss Trunchbull, who has already met Mr. Wormwood. She describes Mr. Wormwood as an excellent person, and explains how, while she was buying one of his used cars, and what a wonderful salesman he was, and how happy she was with the deal, her father described Matilda as a real wart and other things, which is again bringing up this idea that Matilda should have her parents at her side, cheering her on, helping her progress, but instead, even without her having started or school yet, or met Miss Trunchbull, the principal, her father is already setting her up for disaster. He's already pulling her down, ruining her reputation, and depicting her as a terrible person, a wart even, a wart being a lesion on the skin, which is something that you want to get rid of. Miss Trunchbull continues to build on this immediate dislike for Matilda, even though she's never met her, and blames her for something that has happened this morning. As it happens, it is a practical trick that one of the students must have pulled by throwing a stink bomb under her desk. The passage goes, "Of course it was her. I shall have her for that. You see if I don't. What's she like? Nasty little worm, I'll be bound. I have discovered, Miss Honey, during my long career as a teacher, that a bad girl is far more dangerous creature than a bad boy. What's more, they're much harder to squash. Squashing a bad girl is like trying to squash a blue bottle. You bang down on it and the darn thing isn't there. Nasty, dirty things little girls are. Glad I never was one." "Oh, but you must have been, little girl, once, Miss Headmistress. Surely you were." "Not for very long, anyway," Miss Trunchbull barked, grinning. "I became a woman very quickly." Well, now we've met Mrs. Trunchbull, we've heard how she speaks about children, and so it's very clear to us why we have been told to keep away from anyone like her, and why Miss Honey warned her students to keep away from Miss Trunchbull. Now, also, it's very obvious that she absolutely despises young children. So why a headmistress would be put in that position is beyond us. Why she would want to be around these children, which she sees as little blights and as absolutely revolting, is beyond us, except that we start thinking that perhaps she enjoys the position of power. So it goes into that theme of the adults versus the children and how they use that power. In her instance, Miss Trunchbull wants to overpower them, to crush them, to destroy them. It's also quite evident that the way she describes little girls is very misogynistic. Misogyny is it's like of females, of women, and we saw that in Mr. Wormwood. Again, there's a parallel between them in terms of how they dislike women. Now, Miss Trunchbull is a woman, so that makes it even stranger. And the way that she describes little girls could really be a description of herself, that she cannot be squashed, that she cannot be stepped on and stomped on because she's enormous. And it's strange that she feels so threatened by these little girls and the idea of femininity, where later on we will see it's the pigtails of one of the students and all those things. Now, also, she feels threatened by them also, perhaps, because, as we hear, she has been made a fool out of. And so there are pranks that are happening, there are attacks by the children to her, and maybe that is also why she sees them as so disgraceful. And there is, in that respect, a shift in terms of power, very much like Matilda. Another absurd thing that comes out of this quote in particular is the fact that she refuses to admit, or she just about admits that, yes, maybe I was a child, a little girl, for a very little time before I became a woman. And it is just, and Miss Honey says that's can't be right. You must have been a girl. But the fact that she just doesn't want to accept it, is just doesn't want to say that that is what happened, is again an instance of the way that Roald Dahl builds these characters as being absurd. And of course she is absurd, and so in terms of how the reader relates to her, this undermines her intelligence and how we see her. In conclusion, we get the feel that through these stories, Matilda is going to have other allies in this fictional world where little girls are able to take a little bit of control of the power that is taken out of their hands, especially in the face of injustice. They're able to fight back. So that sets us up to the next incidents that come further along. The conversation continues between the two of them, and essentially Miss Honey finally says, well, Matilda is a genius. And the reaction from Miss Trunchbull is very similar to Mr. Wormwood when he finds that this can't be, this just cannot, it is not within his realm of understanding that a little girl could be clever. And she's infuriated. And again, there's this idea, well, Mr. Wormwood said she was a gangster, and this can't be. And that she then undermines what Miss Honey describes that Matilda is capable of doing, as in it's not a big deal. So when Miss Honey proposes to bring Matilda up a class, there is absolutely no way and absolute refusal from Miss Trunchbull. Let's go to the passage. "You're darn right it's up to me," Miss Trunchbull bellowed. "And don't forget, madam, that we are dealing here with a little viper who put a stink bomb under my desk." "She did not do that, headmistress." "Of course she did," Miss Trunchbull boomed. "And I'll tell you what, I wish to heavens I was still allowed to use the birch and belt as I did in the good old days. I'd have roasted Matilda's bottom for her so she couldn't sit down for a month." Miss Honey turned and walked out of the study feeling depressed, but by no means defeated. "I'm going to do something about this child," she told herself. "I don't know what it will be, but I shall find a way to help her in the end." Miss Trunchbull doesn't speak. She doesn't talk to others. She bellows, she booms, she barks, as we've seen earlier. She shouts, and she completely overwhelms Miss Honey. Miss Honey to her is to be disregarded, probably just about everybody else, except people who can get her what she wants. And we can see that in the way that she handles this request for the betterment of Matilda's education, for her development, putting her in the grade, she is again absolutely against it, and she sticks to the rules. These are the rules. This is what I say. There is nothing that will change her mind. And like Mr. Wormwood, it is also clear that she doesn't value education, which is very ironic given that she is the headmistress. And this makes you think of, again, the adults that are in power do not always hold the best interests at heart of the children. So the idea that the children sometimes revolt against that is their way of fighting this injustice. And what we start to wonder is, if she's not in this role for the education, could it be that is literally the fact that she is in power, that she is able to inflict her hugeness and her robustness and her anger and aggression on others, whether it is on the timid Miss Honey and the teachers who are all petrified of her, and of course the children. They make easy victims essentially, and she also takes advantage of the power that she can have over them. It's also interesting how she is such a selfish individual, and this is reflected in the fact that she cannot imagine that Miss Honey is perhaps suggesting to move Matilda for Matilda's own good. Miss Trunchbull is sure that Matilda is to be moved in order to relieve Miss Honey of this wart, as she's being called, and also because Miss Honey is just looking after herself and doesn't want to struggle with this horrible child, which she is not. Finally, there's words in which are used, which are interesting. So to unload Matilda, Miss Trunchbull says, you want to unload her on another teacher. The way that that is used is kind of like, imagine a truck having a load, a dump truck, it reverses and it unloads whatever it's carrying. So it's to relieve herself from her. The other expressions that are used are birch and belt by Miss Trunchbull, and the birch and belt are basically forms of corporal punishment. Corporal being the body, punishment in schools. A while ago now, it used to be quite normal for teachers to use the belt or the cane or the birch. Birch is a tree. The idea is that it is a number of branches or stems from the tree together, and that would be used to hit the child if they were misbehaving. And then you have the use of the roasted, so it's once again using cooking terminology, which is familiar to all of us, to think of how badly Miss Trunchbull would punish Matilda. She would roast her bottom, which obviously doesn't sound very appealing. So Miss Trunchbull, essentially, apart from not educating, would be quite willing to be aggressive and use violence in order to get her way and to once again overpower these small children, even though they are just tiny little beings in comparison to her. In conclusion, this passage also shows us Miss Honey's fantastic determination, that although she's gone and confronted Miss Trunchbull, she has been rejected, her idea has been rejected, though she leaves there, although depressed, as she puts it, that means feeling terrible about what happened, she's also resolved to find a way to help Matilda, and that shows great courage on her part and also her great dedication towards furthering Matilda's education and development.